back out of the picture now, and you just start, you know how to do this, and I'll quietly get in and out a little bit.
Oh, that's all right.
I don't want to...
Actually, all it is just a normal conversation like we've been having, Mr. Barker. I think it's... Sir?
What do you want to talk about, Mr. Doyle? Early days?
Essentially the same thing that we've been talking about when we were eating lunch, because, as you perhaps know, this will go in the Living Legend Library as a permanent record, be used by students in their workshops, or historians, and of particular value is the fact that we get the voices of the individuals that otherwise would not be recorded, because it isn't too often to sit around and make a record.
That's right.
Or anything.
Well, I haven't thought about these things, Frank, for years, very little. I've been so active in business with.
That's true.
Now, my father and mother came to Moore, and Noble it was, in 1889. And right after the run, he was in the run, but he didn't get to keep the land. That's a long story, so I won't go into that. They settled 14 miles east of Moore.
And they...
That's where I was born.
What was the name of that little place?
Slusher.
Slusher.
Was the post office.
Yeah.
It was, we had a store and post office on a corner of our farm. And this little post office, in older maps that you'll find Slusher as a post office.
Right.
I see yet some maps that have Slusher on them. And that was a store and a post office. They delivered mail from the railroad. We wasn't on a railroad, about once a week. And people would come for several miles around and come to the post office to get their mail.
What was his name?
Will Slusher was the original.
No, I mean your father.
Samuel Quincy Barton, S.Q. Barton.
Samuel Quincy Barton.
Yes, my wife's name was. They came from Texas.
Your family came from Texas?
They came from Texas.
And what was your mother's name?
Josie Lakey before she was married.
Josie?
Josephine.
Josephine.
Josephine Lakey.
Yeah.
I asked her name when I was a little kid, and she would tell me, I think about halfway in fun. Cornita Josephine Ada Adeline. Now, whether that was her full name, I'll have to ask her when I go down to Norman. She still lives in Norman.
Well, she's still alive, and on this, the 16th day of February, 1965, and she's, how old is she now?
She's past 90.
Past 90. Is
Good health.
Is she active?
Very active.
Well, good. Good.
Very active. There's a pioneer stock. My father died in 94. And we've been dead about 3 years.
How many in your family? How many? Do you have brothers and sisters?
I have one brother and two sisters, 4 of us. 4 children.
I bet it was interesting in those early days, wasn't it? What do you recall of your youth back in those...
Well, the earliest remembrance that I have that's dated was 1900.
Now, why is
the year of 1900. And how come we remember that? I was about nearly 5 years old. And I knew how to count. And I knew that 19 and 20. And I heard the grown-ups talking about the 20th century.
Oh, yes.
And so I could never reconcile why it was 1900 and the 20th century. So I never did know. For several years, I didn't ask, but I wondered about it.
Yeah.
Why the year 1900 would be in the 20th century.
Did you go to school in Slusher?
No, I went to school at Oak Grove. We walked 2.5 miles to school. My father was a member of the school board. And I walked 2.5 miles. All 4 we children walked 2.5 miles to school.
Was he a farmer?
My father was a farmer, yes. And a stock raiser. He raised cattle. And was a pretty prosperous farmer. That is, we didn't raise, we mostly raised cattle and hogs. We'd take them to, when the stockyards came here, we'd drive our cattle, maybe 200 or 300 head, to the stockyards. And there's a peculiar thing about stockyards. We sold lots of cattle and hogs that most people don't know, and it may be well to tell.
What's that? Before
the First World War, the stockyards paid off in gold and silver, hard money. And there wasn't any currency, and there wasn't checks. If it was $5 or more, they paid in gold. Under $5, they paid in silver. Did you know that?
No, I didn't know that.
So that you can check that. That's absolutely fact. And in those early days, my father ran a breaking team. He used as high as 6 yoke oxen because we was in a heavy timbered country, lots of hickory. And if you know hickory, it's deep rooted tree, and it took a whole lot of power to cut those roots and pull them out.
6 oxen, huh?
6 yoke.
6 yoke. 12 oxen. That's
12
right.
oxen. Sometime he used all he could use, depends on how applying, it was 3 or 4 yoke. But and then you know what we would do with the roots? That was in a wooded country.
No.
We would gather up the roots and haul them off so it wouldn't interfere with the. And then we'd stack them and make a fence out of roots. It would be just as high as a wagon bed, an old wagon bed. And we'd maybe have 2 or 3 acres and keep it for a hog pasture because the hogs wouldn't walk over those roots. So that's what we made the fences out of.
Built-in fencing, huh?
Built-in fences. We would make fences out of the roots that we got in that wooded country. And later, as they got old enough to hunt, but I sure was good rabbit hunting because they'd hide into all those roots there, you see. In the wintertime, we'd sure kill lots of rabbits. I sent my rabbits to Oklahoma City when I was 8 or 9 years old. And there's a nigger preacher lived next to us, went every week to Oklahoma City. It's about 21 miles. I'd send my rabbits up here to freeze them because we had colder weather, it seemed like then than we do now. We'd hang them up and freeze them, take the entrails out, you know. I'd get them 3 to 7 cents a piece for my rabbits. So sometime I was in pretty money-making proposition, maybe sell 100. 100 rabbits to Oklahoma City, selling 3 cents a piece, 4 cents, something like that. Good and bad.
Well, that was a lot of money in those days.
Yeah, lots of money in those days. That's right. Yes, the post office stayed there until I was probably 10, 11 years old, and then they organized a rural route. They settled a little country of a little town of New Orleans when I was probably 9 or 10 years old. They shipped people down. They had quite a campaign as a newspaper in a little town of New Orleans, and this man was quite a promoter, and he sent these newspapers back east. And so they had several train loads of people came from Michigan down to the new country in Oklahoma to settle. And so they had quite a promotion. We had lots of people come to. They call it Halifax first. The little town New Orleans. It's now in eastern Oklahoma County.
Right.
That was in our post office after Susher was done away with. Well, these people a whole lot of them bought lots. They were sold on a new country. And I was probably 9, 10 years old, and I created me quite a little business. I caught a horned toad. And those people back east had never seen a horned toad. So I was playing with it there, and those Easterners from Detroit and up in Michigan, most of them from Michigan, they said, "What is that?" I said, "That's horned toad." They said, "Is it dangerous?" I said, "No, it won't bite." They said, "Would you sell it?" Oh, I said, "Yeah, I'll sell it." So I sold it for $1. Man, I was in the money because $1 was a whole lot of money. And this Easterner gave me $1 for it. Well, I was quite an enterprising young man, so I goes out and catch me some more horned toads. So I come back and displays it around and sell another 50 cents. And then I goes out and catch another, and I got a quarter for it. And then the other boys found out what I was doing, and they really flooded the market. And, you know, supply and demand controls price anything. Well, we flooded the market, and we couldn't get a nickel piece for them. They put them in a little cage, little box, you know, and take them home with them for a pet.
Sure.
And so that was my early commercial enterprise. We were selling horned toads to those Easterners from Detroit. My earliest recollection of going to town, we lived in an area that's just about midway between Shawnee, Oklahoma City, and Norman, that triangle. We lived almost in the center, with about 18 miles from Shawnee and about the same distance from Norman, and about 21 miles from Oklahoma City. So we would go to Oklahoma City, occasionally. Every 2 or 3 years we'd go to Oklahoma City. But we'd go to Norman, which is our chief trading place, once a year, the whole family. We
well,
loaded
you raised enough on your land that
we'd we had a cotton gin in a little town, Stella, and so we'd have a cotton. It was about 3 miles and a half. We'd haul the cotton over there and have a gin. You know what they did with the cotton seed then?
No, what they did?
Burned it. Couldn't get anybody to take it. Had to get the other way, and they burned cotton seeds.
Oh, for heaven's
Can you imagine burning anything? Looked like they put it on a field or something. They'd take some of it home, feed to the cattle, because it was pretty good cow food, but yet had so much of it, wasn't worth anything. We'd give it a seed to pay for the ginning of the cotton. And then they'd burn the seed because they'd sell it sometime. Usually they just have to burn it to get so much of it. And we'd go to Norman once a year. Now we had lots of food, but we raised it. We'd raise all the fruit. We just had all, and that's a great fruit country down there. That's the country. We were sorry for the people who lived up on the prairie because the drought had hit them. We never had any drought. In that sandy, loam soil, new country, raise anything, any kind of fruit, vegetables, so we had plenty to eat. My mother was a great hand to can fruits and vegetables, and we'd dry apples and pears and apricots. So we didn't want for food. The only thing we bought was flour and sugar, coffee. That was about it. We had our own large and raised lots of hogs. Had lots to eat, but we didn't spend much for eating. Didn't need to. We'd get a barrel of brown sugar, several hundred sacks of granulated sugar, get about $3 a hundred. Sugar had advanced less in price than nearly anything else, though.
What'd you go in town for?
Oh, we'd go to town so Mother'd buy a year's supply of clothes. Now, what she would do, she'd buy some ready-made clothes for we children, not much though. She was a great seamstress.
Buy material.
She'd buy material, and she would make her jeans, pants. She had patterns she made, and she'd make her trousers and shirts, make all her clothes practically. And so we only bought shoes and things like that. She would make most of her clothes, and we had pretty good clothes. And she would buy, maybe we'd go to Holland. The old timers there, the McCalls and Hollands and Burries, were the old timers in Norman. Some of them still there.
In Norman?
In Norman yet. I mean, the families are still there. She'd go into the store and she'd check around, maybe buy $300 or $400 worth of merchandise. Stores then are different than they are now.
Yeah, what'd you do? Spend the day in town, or more than one day?
We'd spend a day and night. We'd stay at night.
Where'd you stay? The hotel or where?
No, in those days they had a wagon yard before we put up our horses.
Yeah.
We would usually take 2 wagons and what we call a hack, which was a light wagon with a top on it.
Oh, yeah.
And so the girls and my mother would ride in the hack.
A little more comfortable.
A little more comfortable, and then hauling stuff back. And we'd stay in what's called a wagon yard. And they had a guest house in the wagon yard, which was fitted with some bed clothing, and we'd bring most of our own clothing. We had the beds there, though. And had a stove, wood stove, and had even a place to cook. Had a cook stove there. So it was just like a hotel. They called it a guest house. So we'd put our horses up, then we'd go around. And one of the things we didn't know how to do was ride a bicycle. Because we was in the country, you couldn't ride a bicycle. So when we went to Norman, my older brother was 5 years older than I was, we'd go to a fellow named Bob Moffett, just died about 2 years ago, Bob Moffett, and ride a bicycle. He learned to ride a bicycle. And I'd ride on the handlebars in front of him. We'd tour the town on a bicycle. He'd pay about $a quarter for 2 hours, something like that. And in those days, there were lots of saloons in Norman. I think there's 11 saloons in Norman.
For heaven's sake.
And so I was a little kid. I remember getting loose from the bus. Had to watch me. I was kind of, and I'd go in the saloon.
Sort of inquisitive, huh?
I was inquisitive, and I'd go in the saloon. I was probably, just 5 or 6 years old, I guess. And I see them. I wasn't supposed to be there, so they found me pretty quick. So. I remember the old brass rail. I was in there arguing. Drunk people just then like they are now, I guess. They're very argumentative, so you go in a saloon. Pretty rough place to be. But they'd find me pretty quick. Yeah, we'd go back the next day and we'd stay. We'd get start probably 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. So spend a big part of the day in town. Stay all night. We'd go to Nickelodeon. We paid nickel for Nickelodeon. You see, those jumping pictures, they were peculiar things.
Right.
And so, of course, the first moving picture I ever remember seeing was the bombardment of Port Arthur. You remember when that was?
No. Well, no, I can't.
When the Japanese-Russian War.
Oh yes, Japanese-Russo War.
They had some slides and some little moving pictures, and so my father was on the school board. So we probably wouldn't go on except he got a pass because he's president of the school board. And so we drove over there to see the bombardment of Port Arthur. The first moving picture I ever saw. That was long back about when was that war? 1904, wasn't it?
That's in that area.
Probably
in that
1905. I was probably about 10 years old then.
In Norman.
No, this was in country school house. They traveled through the country.
Oh, okay.
We saw Nickelodeon in Norman. Well, it was quite a show. They'd have a magician there with rabbits and what he would do, with the trick stuff. And then they had a little reel that probably run 10, 15 minutes. Didn't have a story. They show cattle going and horses and trains are traveling. That was the only kind of.
With the accompanying music, huh?
Yeah, with piano music. It was quite an exciting time. We looked forward, and I had a way of making money. We lived in a country that had lots of hickory nuts. So I would gather hickory nuts. We had some of the great, big, long hickory nuts that were kind of easy to break. So a soft shell. And I'd gather up hickory nuts and tie them on the wagon with the bales of cotton as we go into town. Well, I'd get anywhere from 75 cents a hundred to $3 a hundred from a hickory nut, depending on the market. So I was still trying to make money. I was trying to be a business.
You started out trying to make money.
I started out early. But it was quite an occasion. Now, my father, he went to town about every 2 weeks. He would go to a little town, go occasionally to New Orleans. Stella had a couple of stores.
Well, you finished grade school there then, and then what about high school?
I finished grade school at Oak Grove. I know I passed when I was 11 years old. I passed the 8th grade examination, but I couldn't go to high school. I was supposed to, even when I was 11, passed it. And so my father said, "You can't send you off to high school. You're too young." So I took the 8th grade again, and then in 1912 or 13. They had the first consolidated district in Oklahoma. Consolidated school is Stella.
That's Stella. That's the first
Stella.
one.
It was consolidated district number 1. And they had 4 years of high school there. I know our first professor was Professor W.N. Rice that helped start the Oklahoma University. He was a student of he was a tremendous man. Very well educated. He taught there 6 years. He's a man of a very smart man. He was studied in language especially, in both Latin and Greek, and I took Latin under him. He was very good. And so I asked Mr. Professor W.N. Rice, how come you to be down here, little old country school, teaching school? He was principal down there. Had several teachers under him. And he said they let me go at Oklahoma University. Well, he was a man who didn't care about keeping well shaved. His personal appearance was of very little importance to him. He was a brilliant man. He was an intellectual, really an intellectual. One of the few real intellectuals I ever knew was Professor W.N. Rice. And so I asked him why he quit OU. He helped found the school there. He taught there for 6 years. He never would keep his trousers pressed. And his shoes shine. His personal appearance was just not important to him. He was just one of those few men. And he said that after teaching there 6 years, the president of the university, I forget who it was then, came in and told me that my personal appearance was not in keeping with the dignity of this institution. They let him go. But he was a very brilliant one, smartest man I ever knew. It was Professor W.N. Rice. And I guess they were right, because after all, the old man didn't watch his personal appearance like he should, because he's interested in an intellectual. He was really an intellectual. He was a very smart man.
See. Is that what gave you your yen for teaching?
Well, I happened to be a pretty good student, because mathematics especially came easy for me, and I had a very good teacher. I took 3 years of high school under him. I got to be a pretty good in Latin, never did care for Latin, but I had 4 years of it, for geometry and things like that, and that gave me yearning. And so when I was 16 years old, I took a teacher's examination after I graduated from high school.
What high school?
Stella, consolidated #1. This and the first consolidated school in Oklahoma, one of the first in the world, I guess, because it was a new thing, consolidation. And we were very fortunate in having some very good professors in that school. Then I went on teaching school right 3 miles south of there, a little school named Red Hill, when I was 16 years old. It's in the Indian community. If people around Little Axe would know there's lots of tribes of Indians there. So I inquired with Billy Little Axe, who was the founder of the village of Little Axe. After they named after him. He was a fairly old man then.
Indian.
He's Indian. And I said, they were in the unassigned land. You see, they were, and there was a motley crew. There was the around in that area. And so I asked Billy Little Axe, how come that there wasn't creeks or potawatomis or there's every kind of Indian there? After the Civil War, he told me what happened. Said after the Civil War, some of the people in the Southern Army wouldn't surrender. So they go to old Mexico. And then some of their folks got in Congress later. And so they wrote and told them come back to Oklahoma, because they're giving Indians the land now. They would have a better chance. And so the whole group, which was composed of a whole lot of different tribes, the Creeks, the Potawatomis, the Sac and Fox, and the Seminoles, so around Little Axe, there's nearly every type of Indian. So they gave them part of the unassigned land. It wasn't assigned, they call it the unassigned land. And so that's how come there's so many different tribes in that locality. The group that didn't have their allocation.
That's where you first started teaching.
And that's how come Little Axe to be there. I was teaching school there, and I could hear those tom-toms beating some nights all night long.
How much did you get for teaching there?
I got $55, $5 more than I'd ever paid. And the man that hired me was a fellow named Mr. Bernard. He's president of the school board. And the other two members had been where I graduated at Stella, consolidated #1. They came up there and said, what you going to do? And I couldn't do anything, teach school or work, day labor or farm. And I didn't want to do either one, so I chose to pass the examination and teach school. But I must see, they told me to have to see the president of the board, who was Mr. Bernard. So Mr. Bernard said he was not in favor of paying $55 a month. He said it's just not worth it. Oh, I said, I couldn't teach for $50. He said, we've never paid more than $50. Usually paid $45. But if the other boys want you, we'll pay you $55. But don't think you're worth it. Don't think anybody's worth it.
Anybody? Huh?
Nobody.
How do they figure that?
He said, when I can hire a man to work 6 days a week, from sun up to sundown, for $15 a month, we don't think that you coming in here teaching 5 days a week from 9 until 4 is worth 3 times what he gets, 4 times nearly what he gets. Don't think it's right. Just not worth the money. Well, I tried to answer him back a little bit by saying, oh, you boarded this man. He got room and board and $15. Well, he said, oh, he did enough chores to pay for the room and board, and I imagine he did too. He had lots of cattle, wood, chopping,
besides
cattle.
His sundown job. What did it cost you for room and board then?
Oh, I stayed with a very wealthy, nice family there, wealthy family. They wouldn't keep boarders ordinarily, but because they had several farms, they were very prosperous people, named Cal Robinson. And I stayed with them, and they charged me, and they apologized for that. They charged me $10 a month. And Mrs. Robinson was really a good cook. I know that one time I was about 17, 18 years old, staying with Cal Robinson. And he sold a bunch of sheep at Packing Town, and he banked at First National Bank of Norma. So he brings home about $200 or $300 in gold. They paid off in gold in those days. And so he said, Barton, you go into a teacher's meeting at Norman. We only went about once a year to Norman, but that was a teacher's meeting. Said, will you take this gold and deposit it in the First National Bank for me? Well, I couldn't say no, but I didn't imagine how much $200 or $300 in gold weighed. It's pretty heavy. So I took it with me, and I caught the train at a little town of New Orleans down here. Caught it in the evening. I think the evening train went to about 6 o'clock, 6:30. And I only had a morning train, evening train. So I goes to Oklahoma City, and I stop at the old Katy Depot. Most of you remember where it was, down east there, Rock Depot. It's kind of in a rough neighborhood anyhow. So I gets off the train probably at 7 o'clock, and I go into a hotel. And I'll pass by every alley I'd pass by. That money I just imagine that was stuck in my overcoat. I had it in my overcoat pocket. It was in the wintertime. And so I go to a hotel, and I didn't know my way around enough to keep safe in a hotel. So I took old Cal Robinson about $300 up to my room, and I stayed awake all night watching it. I couldn't go to sleep. So I get up early the next morning. I catch the Interurban to Norman. I get down there, and it sure was a relief to
get rid of that gold.
Get rid of that gold. It sure was.
How long did you stay there to teach, in teaching?
I taught there for 1 year, and then we had a superintendent that most of you know, the Barber family of Norman. Mm-hmm. They're there yet. They're mighty fine people. And so Kate Barber was chosen as superintendent of schools. So she came to see me down at the Red Hill, next to 2 miles from Little Axe, North Little Axe. And she said, Barton, you two good teachers be down here in the sticks. And so I said, I'm going to get you up in Norman. So she comes by and sees me again and said, got your school if they like you. Said, pays more than they do in Norman. They don't pay anything in Norman. They're grade principals. They're at East Side and West Side School. N.H. Edwards was the principal. He got superintendent. Mm-hmm. He got $1,800 a month. A year. $1,800 a year.
A year, yeah.
Not a month. $1,800 a year. And the grade principal, well, one of them was Jason Carrier, and he got the magnificent sum of $90 for being principal of the West Side School.
Oh, that's a fantastic one.
Yeah. And so she got me a school out west of New Hope School, right west of Norman. The schoolhouse still there. I was principal school, 2 rooms. I was principal school, paid $125 a month.
How many students you had? Remember?
Oh, I had a problem. Now the first school had 84.
Yeah.
But this school I probably didn't have but 60. 60 or 65. And but I remember going to see those people to get that school. Miss Kate Barber, told me that she had it all fixed up if I suited the people, but I had to go and see them. They couldn't hire me on site not to see them. So I had a big black horse that was sure dandy. Man, he was a saddle horse. And very scared of cars. So I waited. I went to Norman. I put up a little cottage they made in the hotel. I put my horse up at the wagon yard where we used to stay years before, Riley's wagon yard, I'll remember. And so I started out about dark. I think I'll go leisurely out. It's nearly 3 miles out to the school, so I think I'll start early and ride slowly. So I get started out of town, and here come a bunch of university students in an old, great big old Bealy touring car. That was the biggest car ever sold, but she had 15 college students. They had old carbide lights. Well, just as we crossed the railroad track going west, my horse started running. And I want to tell you, they was hooping and hollering right behind me. And there I was riding that 3 miles. I was afraid to pull my horse over. He's tough enough anyhow. I was afraid he'd fall in the ditch, bar ditch. Mm-hmm. So we went 3 miles. There was a college student back behind watching me ride that horse. And I wondered what was going to happen if my horse fall down because they were so close to me. Just before we got there, the horse jumped to one side. And the car went on, and then that horse took after the car, and it took me nearly a mile to stop him. He was a tough mouth. And so I began to teach school there. Later I went to Stroud, coached football there.
Coach football, huh?
Coached football there. Had a very successful short career in coaching football.
Where'd you go from Stroud then?
At Stroud, I resigned at Stroud when the boom came there in 26 really. I resigned, and they wouldn't let me resign unless I would get on the school board. So we had a school, one of the members of the school board that owned a lumber yard, and we was building a big new schoolhouse. And so he wanted to bid for material on the schoolhouse. He had to resign, so they said, we're going to let you quit if you'll come on the school board. So I taught one day, about this time of year, I guess. I taught one day till 4, and then at 4:30 I became a member of the school board, which is very unusual.
Yes, I should say so.
And so I served on the school board 2 years. Then about that time, the mayor was a fellow named Walter Hadley. Most people in Oklahoma City know W.A. Hadley. So when
he was mayor of what, Norman?
Mayor, no, he was Stroud, just Stroud. And then when Bill Holloway took after the man from Prairie was impeached, Johnson was impeached.
Johnson.
Bill Holloway became governor. Well, he got W.A. Hadley as his private secretary. Well, our chairman of the board, I automatically became mayor. And W.A. Hadley came to Oklahoma City as private secretary to Bill Holloway, Governor Holloway. And he lived here until he died about a couple of years ago. He was he was a wonderful man. He was coordinator for all the ice companies here for years.
Well, then you became mayor of Stroud. What year was that?
Oh, that was in 28.
And you were how old were you?
How old was I then? Oh, I guess I was around 30. And then I was elected to mayor, and I served as mayor there for about 12 years.
When did you get married?
Got married in 21.
What were you doing then?
I was coaching football when I got married. I married a school teacher.
Oh.
And so we got married, and so naturally we wanted to get it. We were energetic young people. We had a little bit of money.
This area is, well, I suppose like any pioneer area, is made up of good, sturdy people, hardy stock. Well, they had to be to exist. I mean, you carved your existence.
It's always been said that there are 3 generations. The pioneers that come and lay the foundation. The builders that build on top of that. And then the wasters that spread it out again. And so I hope my family doesn't develop that way. Because
I don't imagine they will.
I tried to be the builder. My father was a pioneer.
You got, they have pretty good basic rudiments that you passed along.
That's right.
Before I interrupted us earlier, let's see, where were we on?
I was telling you about I got married.
Oh, yes.
In 1921, I married a girl teaching there named Dolly Babb.
That was in Stroud?
That was in Stroud. She was a teacher there, and I was teaching, and so we happened to room at the same place. And so we got married, and she was from Missouri. And she thinks all the people from Missouri are good people. She still thinks that,
Well, sure, naturally.
And so I can't get her over at all.
Where was she from in Missouri? What town?
I was married in Stroud. Well, we were really married in...
No, where was she from in Missouri?
She's from Buffalo, Missouri.
Oh, yeah.
The biggest inland town in the world, I guess, without a railroad. Is the county seat of Dallas County.
Yeah.
And so she's from north of Springfield. It was then about 40 miles. It's now about 25.
Yeah, so Springfield spread out a little.
Yeah, well, Springfield spread out, and then they straightened the road.
Yeah.
And so she lived in Buffalo. Her father was a Christian minister. And she has 2 brothers that are Christian ministers now. So they were pioneer stock too. So when we get married, and my wife said to me, we were discussing our future. Naturally, we had a little money. I had about $2,500. I always saved my money, and so
Well, it was a family trait, wasn't it?
It's family trait, and she had saved in the few years she had been teaching. She had saved $500, and so which I thought was very unusual for a young lady. So when we got married, we pooled our resources, which is $3,000, and so she said, "What can you do?" Well, even though I finished OU and I did a pretty good job in arts and sciences there, finished a pretty high grade, but I hadn't gone to school to prepare to make a living. The kind of education I had was a very fine education to live by.
Yeah, good liberal arts.
It was liberal arts, but it's no good to make a living with, unless you taught school, unless you taught. And so we thought it over, and when I began to study the things that I could do, I just couldn't do anything. I wasn't prepared to do anything except, I was very strong. I could do any kind of physical labor. And I was fairly intelligent. I could do nearly any kind of teaching. I wasn't prepared for the college, while I did teach in college a while. I'll tell you about that after a while. I taught 1 year in electrical engineering, but I was in the Army when I did. Got credits for it. And frankly, I never did get no bonus on account of the credits I got there. They said if you get credits, you don't get a bonus. And so that knocked me out of my soldier's bonus. That was my bonus. Yeah. But when my wife asked me, "What can you do?" we began to study what I could do. And I could do nothing to make money except coach football, teach school, or physical labor. When I was eminently qualified physical labor because I was very strong and husky. And didn't want to do any of those. I liked coaching football, but didn't pay anything. I think I was getting in principal school about $175 a month, which is comparable to what most of them were getting at that time. And I think we got up $200 last year. I taught $200 a month. And then very often we had discount awards because we didn't have money. We'd take them to the bank and get a discount. I wouldn't discount mine. I'd buy up other people's and hold them and get the interest. So I was still practicing the economy. But when we went on, when we tried to decide what we was going to do for a livelihood outside teaching school, because I didn't want her to teach. I was hoping she'd take care of the family that we think we were going to raise. So she quit teaching, and we decided, I thought that I had studied a little about theater business. I stayed with Leo Allman, an old-time farmer that had moved to town from Norman, a very prosperous man. I stayed with him and his stepson, Arthur Lewis, on the University Theater there.
Where? In Stroud?
Norman.
In Norman.
Yep. So while I was going to school and teaching school, I'd alternate going to school and teaching school, I stayed at this Leo Allman's, and I would go down with Arthur Lewis to the University Theater, and I'd studied the operation of the theater. I'd help him count the money and sweep out and do some advertising. I just did nearly everything. Never charged him anything because I just along with him. He was a young fellow, and I enjoyed his company and tried to help him out. And he was a pretty prosperous theater man. And so I told my wife that possibly we could operate a theater. So when school was out, we spent all summer trying to locate a theater we could buy. We saw several that we thought was pretty good. We had a limited amount of money, about $3,000. So we didn't know whether the theater succeeded or not, one that we could buy. So our native caution still made me want to buy. So I bought out a fellow named E. Brown, Ezra Brown, who owned a little 4-room house. He owned the building and he owned the equipment.
Where was this?
In Stroud, Oklahoma.
In Stroud, yeah. Right.
Now this equipment consisted of some most of the benches, wooden benches, as far as the theater is concerned. And they had in their folding chairs that were tied together by 1/4, so they would slide around. Well, and the equipment was a little motorograph a machine that you turn by hand, just like a coffee grinder, to remind you of it. And you'd have to stop and change reels. You had only one machine. So we bought that. We paid $3,000 down on this theater, We probably gave $7,000 or $8,000 for the building, pretty nice building, and a little home. So we had to owe about $4,000 or $5,000. And that note was, man, it was a yard long, $100 a month in interest. And so we began to mark that off. And so in about 1925, 26, got it paid off. My wife did most of the operating the theater. You see, the reason why I didn't get to be superintendent, they offered me a job as superintendent there. But I couldn't operate another business as a superintendent.
That's right.
But as principal, I could have business. But as top man, I couldn't. So I chose to be principal instead of superintendent. Superintendent didn't pay a whole lot more. So that was our career, started in 1921, September 1921, in the theater business.
I understand you still own that theater.
And I still own that theater. Of course, in a short while, we re-equipped it. We bought some motor-driven machines.
Right.
We modernized it. We made a whole lot of money. And then the boom came. I had to quit coaching football. I had quite a career coaching football. You know what it reminded me, it's kind of a funny thing what these big old country boys will do. I had a big boy, he even boy, we called him Big Boy. He was about 6 feet 6 inches tall, and weighed about 215, 20. Man, he was quite a physical specimen. And so he was just ideally built for a tackle. His name was Daffenbaugh, Big Boy Daffenbaugh. And so I taught him a little bit about it. He was just a beginner. So I was playing him at guard. Because a standing guard, where he wouldn't have to do anything, only just make a hole, just hold the line, you know. Well, so he would break through the line. He's awful strong, and he breaks through the line and get back there, but he wouldn't tackle anybody. And I said, Big Boy, why don't you tackle those people you get back there? He said, I'm not tackling, I'm guard. He said, if you want me to tackle, put me in as tackle.
Okay.
You can't imagine anybody being that ignorant in football. So I put old Big Boy in as a tackle, and he did a pretty good job. He wasn't too smart, but he's awful powerful. You know, I know I never had a victorious season, but I did win 18 straight games. Now the people that know their football, in 1923, my team played against Bristol that had two of the Leckrone boys that are famous at OU, Roy Leckrone brothers.
No, of them. Heard of them.
They were on the opposing team. And man, they like to kill us. I won't tell you about a team who wasn't trained, and they'd been on a 6-week conditioning trip. And no boy, later went to a fellow named Hafer was the coach down there. But anyhow, I had to give up coaching later because business got so good. I gave up coaching.
And that was your start in the Barton Theater.
Yeah.
Huh? Where'd you go from there, Mr. Barton?
I stayed in Stroud, and we had I own a whole lot of property yet around Stroud. We stayed in Stroud until about 1940. And in 1940, we had accumulated some theaters all the way from Disney, Pryor, and over in that area.
Well, while you were there, you were starting to pick up the other properties.
I'd put in one at Weatherford, but I had two at Pryor, and so I was accumulating a whole lot of property. We were accumulating a bunch. We located someplace. We just began to gather property. My father was that way. I guess it just inherited training. I don't know what, but anyhow, we just began to accumulate property. So in 1940, we decided that we wanted a theater in Oklahoma City. There were several reasons we wanted to get up where the children could have better educational advantages as far as college and all that was concerned. We're getting a boy old enough to go to college, and so we thought we'd go to Oklahoma City. So we came and got a location in the Redskin Theater out on Southwest 29th. And so we put that in 41.
Southwest 29th where?
August 6th.
About where on Southwest 29th?
Oh, just right next to Western. Just between Western and Walker or something. So the theater's still there, doing well.
Still yours?
And my friends, I'd look over Oklahoma City, go up to hotels, look over Oklahoma City, trying to find locations, seeing what people we know. So I picked out the south part of town. My friend said, you can't go out there. I said, those people over there, they're too poor to go to this show. And that's just about the lowest part of town. I never put a theater there. But I got acquainted with people and very fine people. And very prosperous people.
That's right.
And so since then, there's not room for a theater on the south side of town. So we got two of them over there. They had the Blue Moon Theater and the Yale and the Capitol was in the circle. Well, I put in about 12 over there since then myself, and all of them done pretty good on that side. And so we've had quite a career in Oklahoma City, been very fortunate. Oklahoma City's been very good to us. We've accumulated a whole lot of property, done real well. I was served in lots of capacities. The only capacity I'd serve in was a job that didn't pay any salary. I never did have a salary job. I served on the school board, on the planning commission, head of the Atoka Water Project, the Oklahoma City Municipal Improvement Project.
Well, that Atoka Water Project, perhaps someday we can get into that by separate from this.
I would like to have a time sometime to tell you the whole story of that. We don't have time now.
It's a fantastic story. Let's put that on another tape for record.
Yeah, sometime, yeah.
Sometime in the near future.
Well,
what did you charge for admission to theaters back, when you came here? How much in Stroud? About a nickel or a dime?
Oh, when I came here, I charged 20 cents for the lower floor and 18 for the balcony. It was a funny thing what happened in the theater. I just opened up my theater and the war hit right after it opened up, you know. And so there's a whole lot of these country boys began to come to town. So one night, I see three great big old boys marching in, and I knew they'd got in at the back of the theater because they hadn't bought a ticket. So I followed them into the restroom there. They'd grown. They were 17, 18, 19 years old. They got a job in town. So I got talking to them, and I put rough on them. I learned how to handle a boy. It'd make him think he's the meanest man in the world. First, believe him as your friend when you leave him. Mm-hmm. So these boys have tried to teach them a lesson. I talked to them pretty mean. Then I brought them in, and I said, "Now, boys, you're stealing. But I'm going to let you go out and buy a ticket like a gentleman and go in." So I gave them each one 18 cents a piece. That was balcony price. Mm-hmm. You know? They said, "Miss Barton, we won't take your money. We're so ashamed of ourselves. You taught us a lesson that we'll never forget, but we can't take your money." I said, "I'm going to make you go to the show. You wanted to go bad enough to steal your way in." Mm-hmm. So the climax of the story is this: that they went to the show unwillingly because they felt ashamed of themselves.
Right.
But in the next week, I see them standing at my office door. They beckoned to me. This is one. So I went out to see what they wanted. They said, "We want to pay you that money you let us have." Oh, I said, "Now, we'll give that to you." They all said, "No, we're going to pay for that. That was the best lesson we ever learned. The lecture you gave us." No. And I want to tell you, those boys became friends of mine. Some of my best customers, I get letters from them. Mm-hmm. Said that we changed probably the whole career. Just a little impressionable boy, you know.
Sure.
And so the whole lot of good can be accomplished in the theater business if you manage it right. But you're dealing with young people.
It's a responsibility, isn't it?
It's a responsibility. We have quite a responsibility in the theater business. I always contend that the help that we hire, the first job they ever had very often. And so I train my managers to be very careful on the inventory, so not to be so lax that let them steal money without finding it out. Because if you make it so easy and you're so lax that you train them they can get by with $1 or $2 before long, you train a bunch of thieves.
Correct.
So and the first job they ever had, so we have a responsibility to the young people that we train. To train them to be honest and do that by being very careful and not be lax in your bookkeeping so they can get away with money. If they know they're going to get caught, that'll deter them, you know. And before long, they'll learn it's best to do that.
Well, you started out with one in Stroud. How many do you have now?
Well, besides that one in Stroud, for which I have leased out, the fellow not paying me anything, you know why I don't get after much? I'm afraid he'd give it back to me. So, you see, and I couldn't run it because little town theater, little town bad business. It's good for the town, but it's sure not good for
not good for the investor.
Not good for the investor. We've kept that a whole lot out of the sentiment more than anything else. We own quite a bit of property around Stroud. And we have 20 here now.
In Oklahoma.
Oklahoma City and in Byron, War Acres, Del City, Midwest City. Theater business has been a very fine business. It had its lowest step about 51 when television came in. Man,
yes,
it killed it. But it's coming back. It
took quite a beating.
Now any question you'd like to ask about in the olden days when I was a kid, and really the other early days. Now when I can first remember, my father didn't wear guns. He did before because you had to. Not that he ever used them, but it was just self-protection. If you had them, they wouldn't jump on you. There was no law in the land when he came here, except the closest law was Fort Smith. They had some vigilantes. He was the head of vigilantes there to hunt up horse thieves. Very often they would come to him maybe with daylight or some morning and say, we can track these horses in this soft ground. And they'd find most of them over by Shawnee. That's where most desperators hung out.
Really? What'd they do if they caught them?
Oh, and when I got old enough, they used to hang them. But when I got old enough, they had enough law then that they would take them to jail. They take them to jail. So, but I remember him. The only time I remember him wearing his gun was when he went on that vigilantes where they stole horses and everything, and he headed the delegation to hunt them up. And he wore his guns then, but I see him in the dresser drawer. He had two pearl handle Colts, both of them the same size, one on 45 frame and the other on 44 frame. And so he kept them. I wish I'd kept them in his scabbard in the dresser drawer. I never saw him wear them except when he was hunting horse thieves.
You have no idea what became of them, huh?
I don't remember what came of them.
When did your father die?
My father died about 3 years ago in Norman.
Just 3 years ago.
Yes. My father and mother, if he'd lived a little longer, would have had their diamond wedding anniversary. He just like a little September. Yes, the early day was there was lots of outlaws in that area, a few Negroes, and a few family about every mile, white family. Now the Negroes were there when we went there. I think they were squatters. I don't know because they're there. I understand when we went there. There's a peculiar thing that were our closest neighbor was the Graffenreeds. Mr. Graffenreed runs a pie shop over here now. Her mother, she's a widow. And we had the other day close were Negroes, close neighbors. They had been slaves, and then when they got, they were pretty good Negroes. One of them Baptist preacher, old Nathan Williams, I remember. And the other one was a fellow named Marshall Mack, and they had been overseers in the river bottom in Arkansas, where they claimed that white people couldn't stay on account of certain flies and mosquitoes and things. And so they were pretty well high grade colored people, and we treated them nice. We didn't associate with them socially, but every other way, just
fine people.
Fine people. Fine people. And the one thing that would be interesting to the people since the integration has come in, Marshall Mack had been overseer and a pretty well educated colored man. He was our next neighbor, about nearly half a mile away. He finally moved to Oklahoma City, but he thought a whole lot of my father. So my father would come up and haul produce to town. He'd see Marshall Mack down on Farmer's Road, which is in California Street, you know. Marshall Mack said, Mr. Barton, I can't invite you to go home with me, feed you. But here's $2. I want to furnish your room. But he understood that they couldn't invite him home with him. Well, then you get a good meal for a quarter. You get a good hotel room for $1. So they take that $2. And he would have been offended, the nigger would, if my father hadn't taken the money.
Taken it, right.
And so we were friends with the niggers. We got along with them. because we didn't associate with them. We didn't go to church or school with them. But they're the fine neighbors ever knew. Those colored people. They're high grade. They were in the lower class of niggers.
There are a lot of interesting characters back in those days.
That's right, but I've always wondered where those niggers came from. Whether they've been there, I don't know whether they were squatters or came in. They owned a farm, I guess, apparently.
Well, probably freed slaves.
Well, they had been slaves.
Mm-hmm.
They had been slaves there, and it was quite a... Well, we had quite an interesting community. Now, we had spelling bees. We would go, I learned to spell. I was kind of a natural speller.
Mm-hmm.
You don't learn that. Well, you learn it too, but some people just spell, some people can't. We would go, the 3 schoolhouses close, we'd go 3 nights a week to country school at night.
Mm-hmm.
Spelling bees. We usually Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday.
No, very little. I was we were brigaded with the French. The 15th New York was brigaded with a regiment of French troops, but I was only on the front 3 or 4 days, and fortunately they sent me back to the SOS because I wasn't qualified to fight. With my rank, I couldn't have controlled troops. I hadn't had the proper training, so they sent me back for administration. That's where I served all the time I read. But I remember we had a second lieutenant that was assigned to me because none of us could speak French, you know. And he was telling me of his experiences in the line. And the problem of the rats. Of course, that was a real problem over there.
The rats?
You wouldn't remember that, but in these trenches, the rats were, and all over that country, they were just a country full of them. And I was sleeping in a dugout with a floor under it, and the first night, the damn rats were under I'm sorry, but were under the floor there, and of all the noise, I couldn't sleep for the rats. And he was telling me about the experience he had. Woke up one time, and one was down his pajama sleeve, and we were back in a rest period, rest area for probably 7 or 8 miles back of the line, and in the moonlight, we sit out there and chunk those confounded rats that are just running around all over the country. They're just lousy with them. But of course, all of that fighting, you know, was done in trenches. And
in the First World War,
yes. The whole France was just a mass of trenches.
And the weather was normally was usually lousy, wasn't it?
Yes. Of course, I went over in April and came back in December. I was only over that period, but fortunately I saw the good part of the weather. But in the wintertime, must have been awful. Mud and rain and snow. And of course, it's probably harder on them than it was in the Second World War.
Yes, as far as the weather was concerned.
Yeah, oh yes. But in that war, we had far more deaths from flu and casualties from the flu than we did from the war. We had I remember one time we had a boat came over with 350 men dead on it from flu that had died on the trip over from the United States. But that was in 1918. You remember the terrible flu epidemic. You gentlemen wouldn't remember, but I remember it very well. People just died like hogs. It's terrible. But So after I came back, why, I went in business, and here I've been ever since.
What was the obviously the acceptance to the insurance business back in those days seemed to be enthusiastic, much the same enthusiasm for everything else they did around this town. Did you find that it was difficult to sell?
Well, I expect I had been in work for Siemens for 6 months before I sold a policy. I didn't know anything about the insurance business. You had to inform yourself. And nowadays, well, when we employ anyone here, it takes them 6 months to a year to learn the business, because it's a quite rather complicated business. And but then, why, it became rather easy. Competition wasn't quite as keen as it is now, and our business progressed rather rapidly, particularly after I went in business for myself.
Where was your first office?
In the Concord building.
That was the first tall building in town, wasn't
it? Yes, sir. It was built in 1908 it still is one of the nicest office buildings in Oklahoma City. They've maintained it beautifully, and it's a wonderful building. Mr. Concord's son-in-law managed the building, and Dudley Callahan, who was quite a fine man here in Oklahoma City, well known, and died some 15 years ago, I guess, or more, from cancer. But he operated that building in a most excellent manner, and they have continued to do so all through the years. Fact is, the only reason I left the building was because the United States Fidelity and Guarantee Company, my main company, was opening a branch office, and we wanted to be in adjoining offices, and they didn't have the space. And we moved into the First National building when that building was constructed, because they did have the space, of course, and the Concord building didn't. And it was a very fine relationship we had over there, and a very wonderful office. I'm sorry to leave it.
When was the First National building built?
1929. The bank moved in there in 1930. It was probably finished in 1931.
And then you came over here when?
In October of 49. We moved. The USF&G built this building, and we moved in here into this office. Been here ever since.
Well, you've seen all the changes that have taken place in downtown Oklahoma City, though.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And it's disturbing that to find our downtown area in the situation it's in now. Of course, this urban renewal is going to help it tremendously, but that's going to take a long time. And right now, it's holding up construction downtown because they haven't approved the plan and worked out the details of the plan. But I know of a place right now that where they were considering building a building on Main Street. But because of the urban renewal, they've decided not to, because if they should build it now, then it would have to be condemned, and it wouldn't be in keeping with the plan, and so they're withholding it. So that is delaying construction, something like this building over here on Broadway. I understand they've given up the idea of building that building now. I don't know whether that's true or not, but I heard that.
I don't think it's the last report. It wasn't concluded whether they would or would not. They are meeting, I suspect, with the urban renewal people and the people in the pay plan to see if it can be made to fit in the overall picture.
Yeah. Oh, in the 52 years that I've been here, there have been a tremendous change made in Oklahoma City. I remember that when I was in the Capitol building, my secretary lived where the Tower Theater is. And that was during the draft, and we were handling the draft for Oklahoma. We only had the one employee, and we'd work about 18 hours a day, and I'd have to, that 23rd Street wasn't paved then, and we had to walk, I would walk home with her take her home, and then I'd walk down to 7th and Robinson, where I lived, in the mud. Even 23rd Street was not paved then. And that was, she was really sitting out in the cotton. Her home little cottage out there was out in the cotton field.
Where was your first home?
My first home was on just west of Walker, 525 Northwest 24th Street. And I lived there for a year or two and then moved on 17th Street, and now live on 38th Street.
And even in those days, your home was out in the country too, wasn't it?
Oh, yes. Yes, when Mrs. Earp and I married, we married in her home on 34th Street, right off of west of Classen. And there were no houses north of there at that time. That was 1917. And but of course the streetcar ran out to Belle Isle. Now why it went to Belle Isle, I don't know. Except Belle Isle was quite a recreation center in those days.
I was going to say, wasn't that an activity center?
Yes, they had boating and bathing out there, and it was quite a recreation center.
Was the power station there at the time?
No.
Or was that just a natural body of water?
That was a natural body of water. That later on, the power station was built there. I don't remember when, but just quite a little while. It must have been in sometime in the 30s.
Did Classen Boulevard, even as an old lane, did it go out that way?
Yes, out to Belle Isle. It was paved all the way out to Belle Isle.
Oh, it was?
Mm-hmm. And the streetcar ran out there and turned around and came back. Of course, everybody knows in those early days, everybody had to either walk or ride a streetcar. And there were a lot of horse and buggies, of course, at that time. But I remember I used to go out to see my Mrs. Earp before we married, and I'd stay late after the streetcar, and I'd have to walk from 34th Street down to 7th, where I lived. But I didn't object to it very much.
What's your opinion of the old interurban line as it existed then?
Well, of course, I never could see the reason for the construction of the interurban line. You know, it went to Norman and to Guthrie and to El Reno. I'm sure it was not a profitable undertaking. I don't know why they did it, because they had the railroads going to those areas. But of course, they continued to operate till the transportation company went into receivership.
Do you think the interurban line, if it were operating today, do you think that there might be a possibility of it operating at a profit?
I doubt it very seriously. Too many automobiles. Too many automobiles.
Well, according to the latest statistic, 91% of the transportation is by automobile.
Yes.
Despite the increase in air travel and even some of the increase in some of the train travel, and it's still the automobile has taken over.
Well, it's unbelievable what has been accomplished in the last 40 years in highway construction. I remember I think this was 1921, Mrs. Earp and I decided to go down and see my mother, who lived at Ardmore. And it took us 8 hours to drive to Ardmore. Now it's an hour and a half trip, but and I remember one time we took a vacation and went up to in Missouri, and we were to meet some friends who were going with us in Tulsa, and we left here at 10 o'clock in the morning and got into Tulsa that night at 6. But I can tell the story worse than that. First time I went to Colorado was in 1930. I went with some friends who had a new automobile, and we left here at 6 o'clock in the morning. We got into Enid that night at 8. It took us 5 days to drive to Pueblo, Colorado.
From here, from Oklahoma City.
Now it's 11 hours drive.
That's there weren't any highways in those days.
Oh no. We used a log. You know, you'd go 5/10 of a mile this way, and then you turn to your right, and he had this log with marked. It was the old Ozark Trail, they called it, and the fence posts would be marked so you could watch it too. But those were.
Remember what kind of a car it was?
Studebaker.
Old Studebaker, huh?
And this was this friend that I went with was Joe Bledsoe, who was the brother of S.T. Bledsoe, who later became president of Santa Fe. And he and his wife and 2 children went along. I went along with them rather. And this was his first automobile, and he just handled it like it had been a watch. And when we got to Kingfisher, the thing began to heat, and he thought that he had to put distilled water in the radiator. And we got a big 10-gallon can and put on a running board and bought ice, let it melt, and as the water boiled out, we'd fill it up with that ice water can. But those were interesting days. Interesting days.
Well, there are a lot of interesting people that you did business with, you were associated with, friends with, and so
forth.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Who were some of the most colorful ones that you can recall?
Well, I really can't say that. Of course, one of the most interesting men I was ever associated with was, and the one of the most trying men I've ever associated with was Bob Williams, the 3rd governor, who made a wonderful governor. He was an old bachelor, and had I presume, an inferiority complex in that he didn't know how to deal with people. But he was the most disagreeable and the hardest man to work for I've ever known. He never said a kind word to me in his life, but he never overlooked an opportunity to say something nice about me to somebody else. He was just always praising me to somebody else, but he was just after me all the time. And he built the Capitol while he was governor, the present Capitol building, and which was quite an undertaking, and everybody thought there would be a lot of graft in it, and no one ever criticized him. He was absolutely honest so far as the dollar was concerned, but he'd steal an election just as quick as anybody.
I was going to ask you, how could a man with a disposition or a personality like that get elected?
Well, I guess it was because he was a member of the first Supreme Court and a very able lawyer. And I guess it was because that he had been influential in Democratic politics all through the years before statehood. And then he had made a wonderful record on the Supreme Court. But he just didn't know how to deal with people. In fact, there's one of his best friends, Judge Tom Owen, a lawyer, one of his closest personal friends, and probably responsible for Williams being made a federal judge after he got out of the governor's office. I went to his grave just hating Bob Williams because he hopped on him about something that Judge Owen thought reflected upon his integrity in the court. And although they had been friends for many years, they never spoke after that. But after Owens died, Williams raised funds from the friends of Judge Owen and had his portrait painted, and it hangs out in the Historical Society now. He was a type of fellow who would insult you in public and then apologize in private, but he was a very able and a very fine man. But he was a very interesting character in that respect.
Quite a complex personality,
Yes.
Wasn't
it? They tell a story about him you've probably heard. He was inclined to be a preacher and did some preaching after he came to Oklahoma from Alabama. He came to Durant and practiced law down there, but on Sundays he'd go out and preach to these small communities. And he had him a place outside of Durant, some acreage, where he lived and batched and raised some chickens. So one day he'd been out preaching, and during the afternoon a terrible storm came up, terrible rain, and he came home and found a lot of his chickens drowned. And he said he'd be damned if he'd preach for anybody that drowned his chickens. So he didn't preach any after that.
Oh, he must have been a larper.
Very, very interesting people. Of course, that was a very interesting court, that first court. Judge Sam Hayes, who later on practiced law here for many, many years, they were all in their 30s. All of the members of that court were in their 30s. And this Judge Williams was the first Chief Justice. And they worked, I think their salary was $4,000 a year. Whereas now they probably get $25,000. I don't know what Supreme Court judges get now, but they got $4,000 a year, and which was a lot of money in those days. Well, I don't believe I think the governor probably, when he became governor, got about $7,500 a year. But of course, $7,500 would go a lot farther then than their present salary goes. I'm sure of that.
Do you recall who was on that court besides?
It was Judge Jeff Dunn and Sam Hayes and John B. Turner and I can't remember the man from up in the north. I can't remember his name. But there were 5 of them, whereas there are 9 on the court now, I believe.
I understand the thought behind when they built the Capitol. They didn't put the dome on our Capitol. It was to save the money.
That's right.
Is that right?
That was it.
Because the governor...
The governor just didn't think it was worth the money. And
he couldn't see any use for the dome.
No, there really wasn't any, except for beauty, appearance. And so I think that building probably cost a couple of $1 million. But he had a very fine Capitol Commission that worked with him. Of course, he dominated it, but there were just as many Republicans on it as there were Democrats, which is very unusual for him because he just didn't like to appoint a Republican to anything, but he didn't want any criticism in the construction of that Capitol. I remember while I was Assistant General, Pat Hurley lived in Tulsa. You know who Pat Hurley, of course, later became Secretary of War, lived in Tulsa, and he was very anxious to organize a company in the First World War. And Pat Hurley would, every time, of course, we had companies in the National Guard companies in Tulsa, and so I had occasion to go up there quite often. Well, old Pat Hurley would meet me at the station in his Cadillac car and just wine and dine me in the hopes that he could organize a company and be the captain of it. But old man Bob Williams said, "No, sir, you're not going to appoint any Republican up there as captain of the company." Of course, later on, I went overseas, and here was Pat Hurley came over as Brigadier General. But he just wouldn't consider giving any ordinary appointments to Republicans. They had to be exceptional people. And of course, he loved old Judge Vaughn. The judge was, of course, a very ardent Republican. And Bob Williams thought he was just an outstanding man. And he had a lot of Republican friends, but he wouldn't appoint them to any offices. You can bet on that.
He was a real politician.
Yes, sir.
He apparently was one of the real strong characters of our early
Yes,
government.
he was. No question about it. No question about it.
There doesn't seem to be anyone that's followed him that's... well, naturally, they wouldn't be of the same disposition.
No. The old gentleman he lived to be about 84 years old. Got quite senile, but lived on it at Durant in the hotel and he wouldn't. He was a very untidy fellow, and he didn't keep his clothes clean, and like an old man would, you know. And but he was a great character, great character. I have a great respect for his memory. I remember that to show you the type of fellow he was. When my first child, my son, was born, why, I named him for Bob Williams. I named him Robert Williams Earp. And, of course, wrote him a letter to that effect. But he never said a word to me or expressed any appreciation of honor, what we considered an honor. And so when it became child, my wife and I were not as active Episcopalians then as we are now. And so we didn't have the boy christened until he was about 3 or 4 years old. And when time came to christen that child, Mrs. Earp said, we're not going to christen him Robert Williams Earp. Anybody that has any more appreciation. And that old man, we're not going to. So one time, Ancel Jr. and I were down at the rat quail hunting. And as we got off the elevator, we ran into old Judge Williams. And I introduced him to my boy. And the boy was then 12, 13 years old. And he said, son, what do they call you? And of course, Ancel Jr. said, Ancel Jr. The old man had never known that we'd changed his name, I guess.
Oh, great.
Well, those were great days.
Yes, they were great days. Great days. But and they were a lot better days than they are now. I get disturbed when I see what my grandchildren are conditioned on how they're going to have to live as compared to the way I did, insofar as getting ahead. Competition is so keen now in every profession and every business that it's a bigger struggle now than it was in those days. If anybody had energy, why, they could get ahead in those days. Now, it seems to me that everybody's just fighting for the last dollar, and these youngsters don't realize what a problem they have in front of them. Now, that's the way I look at it. Of course, they don't think so. They don't realize that this is difficult, but our lives were rather... Well, of course, we didn't demand much. We didn't have anything, and we didn't expect much. And we appreciate things more than we do now, I think.
Well, it was a simpler type of life.
Yes, sir.
Eminently more rugged.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. You talk about rugged. I came from Ardmore, and as I told you, and of course you remember Ardmore was the toughest community. You probably don't know it, but Ardmore was the toughest community in Oklahoma in those days. There was just somebody was shot up or cut up on the streets of Ardmore every day. Now that's the truth. And the gamblers and bootleggers all wore guns, and they'd get in arguments and shoot it out on Main Street. And the sheriff of Ardmore killed the Wobbling Willie Ballou, we called him. He'd had this stroke of some kind, and he had a leg that when he walked, he threw it like this, and he carried his gun down in his trousers. And he was down in what they called a Dewdrop Inn down in Ardmore, where it was a kind of a gambling place, I guess, and he was standing down on the steps, went down the basement, and got in a gun battle with the Forsyth boys, and he killed an innocent bystander and shot it out there with those, and killed one of the Forsyth boys, I think. right there on Main Street of Ardmore. And he was later on killed by the sheriff in the office of the county attorney, and the county attorney stood trial for it. The Jimmy Matthews, who's I think is county judge down at Colgate now, or maybe it's his son that stood trial for the killing of this Wobbling Willie Ballou, but actually he was killed by Buck Garrett, who was quite a famous sheriff or gunman later on. But after the oil fields opened up in Ardmore, why he evidently became involved with the bad element, and he became quite a killer later on. He was one of Jack Walton's standbys when Jack had him up here as a bodyguard when he was impeached as governor. But that was a rugged town now.
Was it equally as rugged around here, Oklahoma
No, I
City?
don't think so. I don't think so. I don't think so.
You mentioned Jack Walton. Did you ever have dealings with Jack Walton?
Oh, I knew him, but I had no dealings with him at all. He was mayor of Oklahoma City at one time, you know, and then became governor. As I recall, Jack Walton was an engineer. Did water sewer construction and things, engineering on that type of work. I'm not sure about that. The fact is, his home was adjoining Mrs. Earp's home when we were married. I mean, had been her home. She was lived out 34th Street at the time, but her home was right adjoining Jack Walton, and her father and Jack Walton were very close friends. But that was back before he ever got into politics.
Well, politics around Oklahoma City has been historic in the fact that it's been on its up and down, really in keeping with the earlier pioneers that came here and settled, and they started to move fast. It's been pretty rugged, though, in the political situation, hasn't it?
Yes, it has been. In talking about people who've been around and been in politics for a long time, and who might be of interest to you people since you're developing it, is Judge R.A. Hefner, whom you know, of course. Hefner was mayor of Ardmore at one time, and a long time ago, back in the early 30s, I imagine.
Before he came here.
Yeah, well, he came here, he was then elected to Supreme Court, and after he retired from the court, he became mayor of Oklahoma City. So he has been tremendously successful in the oil business, but he has known politics of this state as well as probably is not to have taken them all part of, because he'd been here over such a long period and was held those three political offices. Of course, one of the most interesting characters that I believe I knew, and of course I didn't know him well, was the old Jack Love, who was first chairman of the first Corporation Commission. You know who he was. Came from Woodward, I believe.
We were talking with Mrs. Oklahoma Belle Cheevers the other day. She was the first white child born in Oklahoma City, and she said that Jack Love, and that's a matter of record, named her Oklahoma Belle.
Is that so? He was a great, big, handsome fellow, and kind of rough and uncouth, I imagine. But as far as I know, he did a very good job on the Corporation Commission, of course. He was, as I said, the first chairman of it, and they had to kind of find their way as they went along in the control of the corporations. Of course, in those days, we didn't have any oil business, which is a big thing with the Corporation Commission now, but their primary business, I guess, was with the railroads, fixing rates and whatnot. But he was quite a character. Of course, he and Temple Houston came from, I think, Temple Houston. You remember old Sam Houston's son?
His son.
Yes, came from the same town. I'm sure it was Woodward.
Was Houston around here at any time, do you know?
I don't believe so. I never knew him. I think he passed out of the picture before my time. But I think it's, of course, was quite a character on television, you know.
Yeah, a lot of times the popular idiom has blown them out of proportion.
That's right.
For obvious reasons.
Just like Wyatt Earp.
No relation.
No, I'm old, maybe back 5 or 6 generations, I don't know. But my grandfather my people all came from Maryland, and I think he was down in West Virginia. His people were down in West Virginia, and he came on down to Illinois and then down into this country. So I'm sure that if you go way back there, you'd find some relationship. But I never knew him. But old man Colcord knew him. And John Boardman knew him. But I'm sure he was not as fine a man as the television would lead you to believe.
Well, some historians will bear that out, I think.
I think there's some other Earps that I happen to know that weren't as good as they might have been.
It's really been
I
interesting.
guess back in those days we all had some skeletons in the closet.
Well, being mortal human beings, that'll always happen.
Yes, sir.
There's no way to get around.
I know I had an uncle that was murdered, and I was only a child when this happened. We'd already moved up here, and he lived in Texas. And he was shot one evening while he was out milking the cow in the back. And some few years ago, my sister sent me a paperback book written by some federal marshal down in Texas. And this book refers to the murder of Joe Earp. And he said, if there ever was a man that deserved to be killed, it was Joe Earp. And he was my uncle.
Well, it's amazing, and it's also interesting how people that have been here and started can draw the comparisons that you can draw with what it was then and what it is now.
Well, it's a changed situation. I hate to see it get so doggone big. I feel like I'm in a foreign country when I get off of the beaten path. How this town has grown in the last 20 years, it's unbelievable. And I honestly, sometimes when I have to get out into the outlying district, I get lost. I don't know where I am. Of course, I don't get out very much, but Mrs. Earp and I drove up to Guthrie one Sunday afternoon not long ago. I hadn't been in Guthrie in 15 years, I guess. And as we came back, well, we cut off of the I-35 and went west. And with all those homes and places out there, you know, that used to be just farmland, it's unbelievable. I hadn't been out there for years. And same way as Southtown. It's just unbelievable to me since I've been here so long, and I've known it's developed, but I just hadn't gone around and observed it. But Oklahoma City had been very fortunate in that it's had two men that are real town builders, and they've been responsible for the progress of this city more than anything else, I think. And that's Stanley Draper and E.K. Gaylord. Stanley Draper has been the most unselfish man I've ever known. A man of untiring energy, and his whole life has been in building up this city. And of course, with the support of E.K. Gaylord, why, he's done a real job. And I think beyond any question, those two men are responsible for the building of this town more than any other factors or men.
Well, it's impossible to turn down Stanley on anything he sets his mind to.
And he'll ask you to do anything.
Anything.
That's for the betterment of that he thinks is better for the betterment of the town. Gosh, he's a man killer, that fellow is.
He's almost killed himself a few times.
Yeah. How he stands a gaff, I don't know, because Stanley's not a young man anymore, but he still seems to work just as hard as he did 10 or 15 years ago.
Well, there's complete dedication there to make this one of the finest.
And he's the most
world.
unselfish fella. He doesn't want anything particular out of it. He just wants this town to be the finest town in the United States, and of course he has made the best Chamber of Commerce I ever heard of.
That's right.
Beyond any question.
It's known internationally.
Yeah.
Mr. Gaylord's contributed a great deal that a lot of people don't know about.
Well, he's an exceptional man. He's an exceptional man. Here he is, be 92 next month, I think. And you talk to him, he seems to be just as alert mentally as he was 20 years ago. And of course he's taken excellent care of himself, but he's been a real factor in this community, and everything that he's been for, I think, has been for the betterment of the community. You might criticize his paper or some of the things that his paper does or says, but E.K. Gaylord is 99 times right, I think. And a man with his power, he used it for the good. He has tremendous power, but it's always for the betterment of the community. Oklahoma City had been very fortunate in having some very able and fine, civic-minded gentlemen.
I think this city has been outstanding in that respect, as opposed to many other cities.
We don't have the tremendously wealth. I mean, we don't have as many people who are tremendously wealthy like we have in Tulsa. Mm-hmm. But everybody participates in it's a community project, whereas maybe one man will build a hospital in Tulsa or do some outstanding thing, give a museum or something. We don't have that here like we do it in Tulsa, but everyone works for the better of Oklahoma City, I think.
Well, our progress in the voting of the bond issues just recently is another indication of what that the public is aware.
Yes, you remember what a problem we had a few years ago on this project down to Atoka on building that water line, and how everybody got into a fight over it, and the town was divided about it. But now that I think everybody agrees that it was one of the finest things that could have happened to Oklahoma City, and everyone seems to have forgotten that trouble they had and disagreement they had now. You find wonderful cooperation and a wonderful spirit in Oklahoma City.
Well, we appreciate your cooperation, I know, at the college for taking your time.
Well, I'm sorry, gentlemen, I can't been more interested, but it's very little I could say that worthwhile, but I'm glad to have you gentlemen come in.
Well, you give us some real gems here.
I think, well, the basis of the whole thing is to record and have as a record from now on in the conversation, the observations and the references that you made that otherwise they don't exist anywhere else, and they will exist here now, and it's the basis of eventually what will become an international library. So we want to thank you very much indeed.
Well, now tell me something.
Yes.
We're through with that. Tell me about your college out there. You are going to conduct.
All right.
You are going to conduct a campaign.